recognize this style, this bag? Of course you do. For the past more than 30 years, we have been the OEM factory for most of the luxury brands around the world. Gucci, Prada, Coach, Louis.
Tariffs against China add up to 145%. That is including the existing 20% tariffs that were already imposed on the
price $23,000, but Guangzhou price $600.
Work with the manufacturers identified in the online videos, and we urge consumers to be aware of potentially counterfeit products and misinformation. Authentic Lululemon products are only available for purchase at our Lululemon store.
Today's show about luxury bags carefully handcrafted in China. Turns out your quote-unquote made in Italy luxury handbag might have more ties to Chinese factories than to Tuscany. Thanks to viral TikToks from Chinese factory workers, the internet is now in a frenzy.
At Hermès boutique will cost you 38,000 USD. But what is the real cost out of the factory? Today, I'm going to break it down in front of you, step by step. First thing first, Hermès only use the leathers from the 3 top-level suppliers. One is called Nuti from Italy. The second is Weinheim from Germany. And the third is Haas from France. One piece of Togo leather, the same leather as this one, will cost 450 USD.
What if the most coveted luxury bag in the world, the Birkin, wasn't handcrafted in France, but mass-produced in a Chinese factory for less than $1,400? What if the name that made it famous, Jane Birkin, never saw a single dime? What started as whispers on TikTok has erupted into an all-out war. Lawsuits, leaked factory footage, and a daughter, Lou Doillon, snatching her mother's name back from the brand that built an empire off it. And now, Hermès isn't just facing bad press. They're staring down accusations of heritage fraud, supply chain deceit, and possible bankruptcy. The illusion of luxury? Shattered. This isn't just about overpriced handbags. It's about legacy, exploitation, and the moment the fantasy finally fell apart. No leaks, no whispers, just impact. On a quiet Monday morning, the kind where luxury brands drop limited edition handbags and socialites post curated brunches, something else dropped. And it didn't come in an orange box. It came from Lou Doillon, daughter of Jane Birkin, heiress of a name that once meant artistry, rebellion, and quiet French elegance. And what she dropped wasn't a designer collab. It was a lawsuit. 5 pages. Ruthless, surgical, and deadly serious. No coy Instagram captions. No teaser interviews. Just a single press release from her legal team that sent shockwaves across the fashion world. Lou Doillon is suing Hermès for misappropriation of the Birkin legacy, commercial exploitation of her late mother's name, and reputational damage resulting from concealed manufacturing practices. Sudden, fierce, no nonsense. And for Hermès, it hit like a bullet through silk. Within hours, the Paris headquarters of Hermès was in triage mode. Executives were pulled from meetings. Lawyers were summoned mid-flight. According to a leaked memo that surfaced online, quickly deleted but not before screenshots spread like wildfire, Hermès issued a level 3 internal crisis alert, something usually reserved for product recalls or blackmail threats. This wasn't just a PR problem. This was legacy warfare. Behind closed doors, production lines were halted. A discreet internal audit was ordered on every single unit in the current Birkin run. Not for defects, but for origins. The rumors they've been dodging for years, the whispers about Chinese subcontracting and repackaged seconds being laundered through European finishing facilities. Those were no longer whispers. They were evidence. They were Exhibit A. Lou Doillon's legal team had done their homework. The filing didn't just accuse Hermès of exploitation. It laid out a timeline. It referenced whistleblower videos, unreleased factory invoices, and anonymous testimonies from overseas workers who claimed they were stitching made in France labels onto bags built in Guangzhou. Bags that would later sell for $25,000 or more, marketed as artisanal, French, and pure. But here's the twist. This wasn't about money. Lou made that clear. According to the filing, she wasn't suing for financial compensation. She was suing for attraction, reform, and responsibility. She wanted Hermès to acknowledge the truth, not just to her, but to her mother's memory. Because Jane Birkin didn't just lend her name to a bag. She lent her values. And those values were being betrayed. Inside Hermès, the fallout was immediate and venomous. Some insiders say that entire sections of the leadership team were temporarily suspended pending investigation. Confidential Slack channels went dead. Executives known for their bravado suddenly refused to go on record. And key influencers, once gifted with quarterly Birkins to flaunt on TikTok and Instagram, were told to pause all Hermes-related content. Suddenly, the crown jewel of luxury fashion had a tarnished shine. And at the heart of the storm stood Lou, stoic, deliberate, and unapologetic. Industry insiders called it the revenge of the daughter. But this wasn't just personal revenge. This was a surgical strike on systemic exploitation. Lou had grown up watching her mother, Jane Birkin, fight Hermès over animal cruelty concerns back in 2015, when Jane famously requested her name be removed from the crocodile Birkin unless ethical standards were guaranteed. Hermès smoothed it over. Jane relented, but Lou never forgot. Now, with Jane gone, Lou was making sure no more smoothing over would happen. To her, this lawsuit wasn't about a bag. It was about a legacy hijacked, about a mother who spent her life as an artist, a humanitarian, a cultural icon, and ended up being reduced to a price tag dangling from a status symbol built on outsourcing and secrecy. Hermès had treated Jane like a signature, not a soul. And Lou wasn't having it. In interviews before the suit, Lou had hinted at discomfort, questioning luxury's obsession with scarcity, the irony of a working woman's handbag becoming a token of ultra-wealth. But nothing hinted at the scale of this legal strike. This wasn't critique. It was war. And now the world was watching. The bag that once symbolized untouchable elegance now represented everything fashion tried to hide. Outsourced labor, brand hypocrisy, and a silent erasure of the very women who made it iconic. Lou's bombshell wasn't just about Hermès. It cracked open an entire industry. And this was just the beginning. Before the Birkin was a bag, Jane Birkin was a force. A singer, actress, activist, an icon of effortless rebellion. Jane never chased luxury. Luxury chased her. Her charm wasn't manicured. Her fashion wasn't curated. She was the kind of woman who carried her belongings in a straw basket until it broke, laughed it off, and kept moving. But when she boarded that flight to London in 1984 and sat beside Jean-Louis Dumas, the then executive chairman of Hermès, her life, and unknowingly, the luxury market, changed forever. What started as a conversation about the impracticality of designer handbags turned into a sketch. A few napkin scribbles, a suggestion, a new idea. And within months, a new product was born, the Birkin. But here's the part the luxury world never wants to talk about. Jane Birkin never earned a cent in royalties. Not from the original design, not from the global sales, not from the $20,000 price tags or the 6-year wait lists, not from the socialite status it gave celebrities, not from a resale value that now competes with gold, not from the articles, the documentaries, the fashion campaigns that built an empire on her name. Instead, she received a single bag a year, gifted quietly by Hermès, sometimes not even her taste. She often sold them for charity. This wasn't a business partnership. It was branding without consent, marketing without equity, a cultural theft dressed in couture. The world saw Birkin and thought luxury. But Jane never designed it, never signed a contract, never trademarked her name. Hermès didn't need her signature. They owned her identity in the court of public perception. And still, Jane never made noise. She laughed it off in interviews. She called the Birkin a bloody heavy bag. She joked that she had to fill it with half her apartment just to carry it. In private, she raised concerns about animal cruelty, about sustainability, about the bag's elitist symbolism, but she never launched lawsuits. She didn't sue. She didn't demand royalties. Because that wasn't Jane. But Lou Doillon? Lou is a different woman. And this time, she's not laughing. In the wake of Jane's death, Lou has become the keeper of that legacy. And what she saw behind the curtain shook her. The lawsuit she filed wasn't a power play. It was a mourning daughter's act of preservation. Because Lou didn't just lose her mother. She lost control over how her mother would be remembered. And Hermès, almost immediately began capitalizing on Jane's passing, quietly dropping limited edition Birkins, announcing new custom lines inspired by Jane's spirit, and re-releasing archival footage of Jane with the bag, all without consulting the family. To Lou, this was more than tasteless. It was predatory. And let's be clear, Jane wasn't just a muse. She was a movement. Her relationship with Serge Gainsbourg redefined 20th century French music. Her fashion instincts reshaped minimalist style. Her humanitarian work, supporting civil rights, environmental causes, women's equality, stood in direct contrast to what the Birkin bag had become, a trophy for the ultra-wealthy. That's the real betrayal. The world wanted Jane's name, but not her values. Her surname became synonymous with status, but her ethics, her artistry, her activism were pushed aside. And when whistleblowers began revealing that many Birkins were not even produced in France, but in factories across China, often under questionable labor conditions, it felt like a final insult. The Birkin was no longer just a bag. It was a fabricated mythology, and Lou decided to tear it down. Her lawsuit doesn't ask for money. It demands that Hermès acknowledge the truth. It calls for transparency in manufacturing, for retroactive credit, for a public statement of accountability, and for Jane Birkin's name to be legally restricted from future use by Hermès unless the family is consulted and compensated fairly. This is legacy warfare, because Jane Birkin gave the world her voice, her look, her name, and she did it with grace. But now, in death, her image is being sold, scrubbed of her nuance, her complexity, her humanity. Lou Doillon is making sure that stops. This isn't just a legal case. It's a cultural reckoning, a fight to remind the world that fame is not consent, and that legacy isn't something luxury brands get to trademark. Jane Birkin didn't want a monument. She didn't need a brand. She left behind something far rarer, a spirit that couldn't be bought. And now, her daughter is making sure it won't be sold. For decades, Made in France was more than a label. It was a promise. A whisper of Parisian ateliers, silk scarf-clad artisans, and old-world craftsmanship passed down like family heirlooms. And at the top of that fantasy sat the Hermès Birkin, a bag so rare, so exalted, so French, it didn't just hold your wallet. It was your status. But that illusion shattered with the sound of a smartphone camera. Because the truth didn't leak from a luxury boardroom, it dropped on TikTok. In early 2025, Chinese factory workers, mostly young women, began posting behind-the-scenes videos of the products they were assembling. Not fast fashion, not knockoffs, Birkin bags, real ones. In one clip, a worker holds up a half-finished Birkin, casually pointing out the stitching guide, the leather paneling, the serial coding. The caption? Hermès says made in France. We made it in Guangzhou. That video hit 7.3 million views in 48 hours. Suddenly, the comment sections exploded. People began questioning everything. Wasn't the Birkin handcrafted in Paris by elite artisans? Wasn't that why it cost more than a car? Why did it look like it just came off an assembly line in southern China? The workers weren't just filming. They were revealing entire workflows, from Italian leather hides shipped in bulk to pre-stamped panels, to the use of French-language quality control stickers placed at the final stage, right before shipping to Europe for final touch-ups. And that last step? That's the dirty secret. Legally, as long as the final 45% of value-add work occurs in France, such as hardware affixation, inspection, or packaging, the product can be labeled Made in France, even if 95% of the labor and components originated elsewhere. This isn't craftsmanship. It's supply chain theater. And when internet sleuths dug deeper, they found something even more disturbing: the actual cost of materials. According to internal factory leaks and supplier invoices, the raw materials for a standard Birkin, leather, hardware, dye, packaging, averaged around $1,400 per unit. Add an outsourced labor and freight, still under $2,000. Now compare that to the retail price of a Himalayan crocodile Birkin, $38,000. Some limited editions resell for over $200,000. That's not luxury pricing. That's manufactured scarcity, inflated branding, and geographic deception. The TikToks opened the floodgates. Former employees came forward. One whistleblower from Shenzhen subcontractor revealed they produced up to 200 Birkin-style components a day, all under NDAs and tight deadlines, with instructions to remain silent about the final client. Another TikTok showed a bundle of factory-rejected bags. Same shape, same structure, just with a slightly crooked stitch or color variation. Some workers alleged that these off-spec units were quietly sold to secondary markets or relabeled for corporate gifting, fueling rumors that the gray market luxury industry is actually fed from inside the factory gates. And Hermès? They said nothing. Their silence was louder than any denial, because admitting it would destroy the fantasy. The fantasy that when you spend 5 figures on a Birkin, you're buying exclusivity. That somewhere in a quiet French village, a lone craftsman is lovingly stitching your initials into calfskin leather, sipping espresso in a sunlit atelier. Not some overworked assembly team in Dongguan punching time cards under fluorescent lights. Made in France was never about origin. It was about optics. It was about status, about the illusion of intimacy between the buyer and the brand. But TikTok ripped the silk curtain down. Now the question isn't just where was my Birkin made? It's what else have they lied about? Because if the most iconic handbag in history is rooted in a supply chain shell game, how many other luxury brands are playing the same trick? The Birkin bag was never just a product. It was a performance. A global stage play starring French artisans, prestige ateliers, and heritage craftsmanship. But thanks to a digital rebellion led by factory workers, we now know that what Hermès was selling wasn't a bag. It was a myth, meticulously curated, outrageously priced, and dangerously hollow. Let's dissect it. At the core of every Birkin is the leather. Hermès boasts of using only the finest, Togo, Clements, Epsom, and for special editions, exotic skins like crocodile or ostrich. But what the TikToks revealed was shocking. Those leathers were shipped in bulk to Chinese factories like those in Guangzhou and Dongguan, already pre-treated and pre-cut using industrial stencils. No artisan sitting under romantic Parisian light with a hand-drawn template. Just conveyor belts, dye vats, and punch-cut machines. And the thread? The famous waxed linen Hermès always references in press tours, said to be dyed in-house and waxed with beeswax in France, was spotted in bulk spools in Chinese workshops. The packaging bore Mandarin labeling. One factory worker, posting anonymously, claimed they were told to leave French tags visible during filming to reinforce the illusion of origin. The French thread, she wrote, is just a story. Then there's the hardware, locks, clasps, feet, zippers. Supposedly hand-polished palladium or gold-plated brass, customized per customer. But in several viral videos, workers are seen sorting hundreds of clasps from industrial bins, each wrapped in protective plastic that reads, "Made in Shenzhen." Some are even shown using pre-drilled bag flaps, where hardware was affixed with mechanical rivet guns, not handcrafted tools. And what about labor? Hermès has long claimed that each Birkin takes 48 hours to make, by one artisan, from start to finish, in France. That image sells the exclusivity. But inside the TikTok footage, the reality looks very different. A production line. One station cuts, another glues, another stitches handles onto the body. It's fast, efficient, and very much not a solo performance. One whistleblower revealed that during peak seasons, a single Chinese factory could churn out up to 1,500 Birkin components per week, which were then shipped to France, where final stitching or packaging was completed to meet the 45% threshold required for a Made in France label. It's a legal loophole, but morally, it's a heritage fraud. This is where the illusion becomes exploitation. Hermès didn't just capitalize on French identity, they weaponized it. They knew that the myth of French luxury, rooted in legacy, scarcity, and old-world charm, was worth billions. And they built a system that let them stamp Made in France, while outsourcing nearly everything French out of the process. The craftsmanship? Outsourced. The materials? Globalized. The romance? Manufactured. What remained French was the marketing, the fantasy, the lie. They sold consumers a dream and gave them an export. And for years, no one questioned it, because the lie was beautiful, expensive, and so well-dressed. But TikTok shattered that spell. One of the most damning clips showed a reject pile of leather panels, each destined to become a Birkin, each slightly off-spec. A factory supervisor explains in Mandarin that the pieces would either be recycled, relabeled, or quietly sold off into the gray market. They'll never say it's from here, she laughs, but you can find them online. It's a system built on doublespeak, on luxury codes with no transparency, on heritage that's only skin deep, literally. Because once the illusion of Frenchness is peeled away, the Birkin isn't a sacred object. It's a product like any other, made fast, made abroad, made to impress. And for Jane Birkin, Lou Doillon, and millions of loyal buyers, the betrayal runs deep. This wasn't just about leather and locks. It was about trust, about believing that when you paid $38,000 for a bag, you were investing in history, not participating in its erasure. But that's the anatomy of the lie. Now, the question is, what happens when the truth becomes viral? For decades, Hermès sold the world a sacred story, a story of tradition, of heritage, of meticulous French craftsmanship passed down through generations. But when the mask began to slip, when factory TikToks exposed the truth behind the Birkin, the most devastating backlash didn't come from consumers. It came from within. Inside Hermès French workshops, the betrayal hit like a bomb. Artisans, real artisans, who had trained for years in leatherworking, thread waxing, and saddle stitching, found themselves staring at headlines and videos that made them question everything they thought they were part of. One craftsman from the Pantin Atelier, speaking anonymously to Le Monde, described the moment the viral footage reached the studio. "We watched it in silence," he said. "No one spoke. Some of us cried. We weren't just lied to. We were used." Within days, murmurs turned into revolt. Walkouts were reported at 2 Hermès sites, including one in Lyon, where workers refused to continue production until executives addressed the accusations. Notably, this wasn't a typical labor protest. It was a moral rebellion. "If what we're making is just the finishing touch on a product made in China," said one veteran craftswoman, "then what is the point of any of this? Why do we put our souls into it?" For artisans raised in the tradition of French luxury, the scandal wasn't just corporate malpractice. It was cultural betrayal. The Hermès leadership, already reeling from Lou Doillon's lawsuit and the TikTok leaks, went into full damage control. Internal emails urged employees to trust the process and reminded staff of globalized supply chain realities. But it was too late. The illusion had collapsed. And now, the ghosts were talking. One of the first whistleblowers came from inside Hermès' leather quality division. In a now-deleted anonymous blog post that was later archived by fashion watchdogs, she described how French workshops increasingly received prefabricated panels for Birkins, with barely enough raw leather to justify in-house shaping. Her words were cutting. "We were artisans. Then we became assemblers. Then we became liars." Another internal leak revealed confidential documents showing Hermès quietly increased outsourcing quotas over the past decade, citing efficiency benchmarks and global synergy. The strategy? Manufacture just enough in France to legally maintain the Made in France label, while quietly shifting the bulk of labor elsewhere. But the most damning blow came from a retired Hermès master craftsman, Jean-Luc Moreau. Once celebrated in brand documentaries, Moreau broke his silence in an exclusive interview with a French radio program. Voice shaking, he admitted, "We were told not to ask questions. The bags came in nearly finished. Sometimes we just stitch the handles and close the seams. But they told us, never say that. Never." For consumers, especially longtime collectors who believed they were buying into tradition, the betrayal stung. Forums once filled with proud unboxings and waiting list triumphs turned into hotbeds of anger and grief. "I waited 5 years and spent $27,000 on my Birkin," one woman wrote. "I could have bought a bag from Alibaba and had it monogrammed in Paris for the same result." This wasn't just a luxury scandal. This was a reckoning, because Hermès didn't just sell product. They sold belonging. They promised buyers a piece of a legacy, hand-touched, hand-sewn, hand-honored. And now, with each video, each leak, each brave voice from inside their own walls, it became clear the product was globalized, the prestige was hollow, and the legacy had been outsourced. French artisans, long seen as the last defense against industrialization, now found themselves betrayed and discarded, tokens in a game of luxury theater. Some have begun organizing for stricter origin labeling laws. Others have left the industry altogether. It's not just Hermès, one whistleblower warned. The whole luxury world is built on the same lie. We just never had the courage to say it. But now, the silence has been broken. And from the inside out, the empire is beginning to crack. When Lou Doillon filed that lawsuit, it felt like a thunderclap. The kind that echoes through boardrooms, blows holes in PR armor, and sends investors scrambling. But what no one, not even Hermès, fully anticipated was the domino effect that followed. What started as a personal, pointed, and powerful act of defiance by Jane Birkin's daughter has now exploded into a global reckoning. The lawsuit wasn't just about unauthorized use of a name. It was about deception, exploitation, and legacy theft. And when the public got wind of it, combined with the viral factory TikToks, leaked documents, and artisan whistleblowers, it lit the match. Within 48 hours of the suit becoming public, hashtag boycott terms trended across social media platforms in multiple countries. TikTok creators began dissecting not just the Birkin bag, but the entire luxury marketing illusion. One viral post showed side-by-side comparisons of a $38,000 Birkin and a $1,400 China-manufactured dupe from the same alleged factory. The caption read, "One's real, one's a lie. Guess which is which?" The outrage wasn't just digital, it was legal. Lou's lawsuit opened the floodgates. Within weeks, 2 new class action suits were filed in the United States, accusing Hermès of deceptive advertising, fraudulent, made-in-France claims, and consumer manipulation. Lawyers representing high-end clients from New York to Los Angeles alleged that buyers were misled into paying astronomical prices for what was essentially rebranded offshore labor. Then came the international wave. In Italy, France, and Germany, regulators began quietly examining whether Hermès, and possibly other luxury brands, violated EU consumer protection laws by mislabeling goods and misrepresenting their supply chains. In South Korea, where Birkins have become status symbols among influencers and CEOs, a consumer protection lawsuit is now underway. Plaintiffs allege they paid heritage premiums for products that were culturally misrepresented. And behind the scenes, the U.S. Department of Justice is rumored to be conducting an early-stage antitrust inquiry. Why? Because Hermès doesn't just sell a bag. It controls distribution through exclusivity, scarcity, and tightly managed resale restrictions. If they're caught inflating value based on false origin claims, it could trigger deeper probes into anti-competitive practices across the luxury sector. The financial world has taken notice. Hermès shares saw their sharpest single-day drop in 5 years following a report by a Swiss financial group outlining reputational risk, litigation exposure, and consumer distrust as critical vulnerabilities. In simpler terms, the brand's golden halo is starting to tarnish, and fast. But the backlash is bigger than Hermès. Much bigger. Industry insiders are whispering that this could be the Dieselgate moment for luxury fashion. The scandal that finally forces transparency, disrupts decades of shadowy sourcing, and shatters the illusion of authenticity. Because the truth is, Hermès isn't the only one outsourcing, greenwashing, or heritage faking. They're just the first to get caught this thoroughly, this publicly, and this dramatically. Lou Doillon cracked open a door, and now governments, lawyers, and furious consumers are pushing it wide open. Fashion houses once revered as temples of artistry are being forced to answer questions they've dodged for years. Where is it really made? Who really made it? And why have we been paying 1,000% markups for something that costs less than a MacBook to produce? What we're witnessing isn't just a scandal. It's a reckoning. And as lawsuits stack, investigations deepen, and consumers demand truth over theater, the luxury world is waking up to a chilling new reality. The era of unchallenged prestige is over. The mask is off. The fallout has begun. In the end, luxury was never about leather, stitching, or craftsmanship. It was about the fantasy that a name could mean something more. That Hermès wasn't just a brand. It was a bloodline of elegance. That Birkin didn't just mean a bag. It meant legacy, class, and the kind of prestige money couldn't just buy. It had to be earned. But when that fantasy collided with reality, raw, unfiltered, and documented in pixelated TikToks from fluorescent-lit factories, it shattered like glass under pressure. Because here's the truth. The fantasy was for sale. And the price wasn't $38,000. It was trust. Luxury sold us a dream dressed in heritage. And now, that dream has been caught red-handed, mass-producing status in outsourced silence, hiding behind labels like Made in France while quietly cutting costs in Chinese factories. It's not just a scandal, it's exposure. A centuries-old illusion brought down by Wi-Fi, whistleblowers, and one woman unwilling to let her mother's name be manipulated one day longer. Lou Doillon didn't just sue Hermès, she detonated a truth bomb. One that hit harder because the name it targeted was so iconic, so untouchable, so perfectly marketed. But here's the question luxury houses are now scrambling to answer. Can heritage be faked? Can you mass-produce prestige and still call it legacy? Can you exploit the identity of a woman, Jane Birkin, for profit while refusing to pay her or her family a cent in royalties? And what does a name mean when it becomes a brand more valuable than the life it was borrowed from? Because that's the cold irony. Hermès didn't just profit off Jane Birkin. They profited more from her death than she ever did in life. And Lou, angry, grieving, and fiercely protective, stood up not just for her mother, but for the truth behind the fantasy we've all been sold. Now, the walls are crumbling. As lawsuits multiply and regulators close in, as artisans walk out and insiders leak receipts, a new question is starting to haunt the luxury world. What happens if Hermès actually falls? If a titan like this, with its billion-dollar mystique and its elite clientele, can be brought to its knees by truth, where does that leave the rest? What happens when scarcity is revealed as strategy? When craftsmanship is exposed as cost-cutting? When Made in France turns out to mean little more than a final stitch sewn in a quiet European workshop after months of offshore labor? The illusion is broken. The fantasy interrupted. And what's left behind is a reckoning no luxury house can ignore. Because this isn't just about Hermès. It's about the entire industry. And if one bag, one name, and one family's fight can expose the gears behind the glamour, what other truths are waiting to be dragged into the light? The stage is set. The lawsuits are filed. The silence is broken. Now the world waits to see. Is the house of Hermès about to fall? Or will it find a way to rebuild the myth once again? Stay tuned.